What if your life wasn't a mistake? What if everything, the loss, the longing, the silence, had a purpose? This is not a video of answers. It's a remembering, a homecoming, to the part of you that always knew. You didn't come here to escape life. You came to feel it, to heal it, to live it as only you can. There is a question that doesn't speak in words, but in longing. A question that sits quietly behind your chest when the world grows too loud. A question that stirs not in your mind, but in the ache of your heart. Why this life? Why this pain? Why this path? And if you've ever sat in the dark and whispered to no one, "I didn't ask for this," this is for you, not as an answer, but as a remembering. You didn't choose this life with your mind. You chose it with your soul. Long before you opened your eyes, long before you breathed this air, you said yes, not to comfort, not to ease, but to depth, to truth, to becoming. You saw this life not as a punishment, but as a portal, a passage into remembering who you really are. And the forgetting? That was part of the agreement, the amnesia, the silence, the confusion. It was all necessary. Because the soul does not evolve by being reminded. It evolves by rediscovery. And rediscovery requires darkness. It requires contrast. It requires being lost, so that when you are found by something real. That is why you came. Not to get it right, not to master success, not to avoid suffering, but to live something honest, something raw, something sacred. You came for the heartbreak that would humble you, for the grief that would crack you open, for the moments that would shatter everything you thought mattered, only to reveal what actually does. You came to learn love by walking through the absence of it, to discover worth not through achievement, but through remembering that you were never unworthy to begin with. You came to experience what it means to fall apart and to rise again not as who you were, but as who you were always becoming. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it's confusing. The pain can feel unbearable. The loneliness suffocating. But even in those moments, especially in those moments, your soul is awake, watching, holding, whispering beneath the chaos. This is the place. This is where you'll remember. You didn't come here to avoid the fire. You came to walk through it and become it, to let it burn away what isn't yours, to let it reshape your edges, to let it reveal the gold beneath the armor. You chose this family, this body, this story, not because they would be easy, but because they would be catalysts, mirrors, lessons. You saw the fractures, and you said yes, not to be broken, but to become whole through the breaking. You chose the wound, so you could choose the healing. You chose the silence so you could choose your voice. You chose the forgetting so that your remembering would be sacred. And no, this does not mean you deserve your suffering. It means your soul saw what you could become through it. It means you are not a victim of this life. You are a participant in its unfolding. And the moment you stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What is this teaching me?" everything begins to shift. The pain becomes a portal. The chaos becomes clarity. The loss becomes language. The soul speaks not in answers, but in symbols, in synchronicities, in the quiet pull toward something you can't explain. And if you follow that pull, not with logic, but with listening, you will begin to remember. You will begin to return, not to who you used to be, but to the one who chose this, the one who knew, the one who trusted. You are not here by accident, and you are not lost. You are exactly where your soul intended you to be. Confused, yes, hurting, perhaps, but awakening. The life you have is not a mistake. It's a message, a mirror, an invitation, not to escape, but to embody, not to find answers, but to live the questions with tenderness and truth. So breathe, soften, listen. Your soul remembers even when your mind forgets. And in that remembering, you will find not just purpose, but peace. You might not remember the moment your soul said yes, but your life does. It remembers in the patterns you keep returning to, in the people who feel strangely familiar, in the places that stir something ancient inside you. It remembers in the dreams that don't let you go, in the lessons that come back wearing different faces, in the emotions that rise without logic and yet carry truth. Every thread of this life is a language, and your soul is fluent in it. Even when your mind can't translate it, your body feels it. The shiver down your spine when you hear something real. The lump in your throat when something unspoken is finally named. The warmth in your chest when you step toward what feels like home. These are not coincidences. These are echoes, reminders, glimpses of the deeper reason you are here. You didn't choose this life to impress. You didn't come here to accumulate or perform, or to be liked by everyone. You came to become real, and realness often begins where pretending ends, where the facade cracks, where the roles fall apart, where what once worked no longer does. That is where the soul begins to speak louder than the ego, and it doesn't shout, it doesn't convince. It simply waits for you to listen, for you to stop running, for you to look at the life you've been given, not with judgment, but with curiosity. What if the things you've been trying to avoid are the very things your soul came here to touch? What if your greatest pain is the soil where your deepest wisdom grows? What if the love you long for isn't something you find in another, but something you remember in yourself when you stop abandoning who you truly are? This life is not happening to you. It's happening through you, through your longing, through your fears, through your messy, beautiful, imperfect humanity. Your soul didn't come here to escape the human experience. It came to feel it, to be inside it, to explore what it means to hurt, to hope, to lose, to rise. It came for the intimacy of being broken and rebuilt, for the beauty of loving even when it hurts, for the grace of finding light even when the night is long. And no, it's not easy. The soul knew that. It didn't choose ease. It chose evolution. And evolution does not happen in the comfortable. It happens in the sacred friction of living, in the tension between who you've been and who you're becoming, in the moments when nothing makes sense and yet something in you keeps moving anyway. That something, that quiet strength, is your soul, still walking, still listening, still choosing to be here. You may not understand your life as it unfolds, but that doesn't mean it's not meaningful. Meaning is not always immediate. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes lifetimes. But meaning is not what makes life valuable. Presence is. The willingness to meet this moment fully, without numbing, without pretending, without needing it to be different. That is where the soul lives, not in the future, but in the now. Not in the fantasy of what could have been, but in the raw truth of what is. And when you meet the moment as it is, you begin to remember who you are. Not a role, not a label, but a presence, a breath, a sacred aliveness moving through flesh and memory and time. That is the real you, the one who chose this, the one who trusted this path, even if your mind cannot understand why. The one who knew that this life, with all its edges and curves and contradictions, would be the perfect place for awakening. Not because it is perfect, but because it is real. And in that realness, your soul can breathe. So if you're tired, let yourself rest. If you're lost, let yourself be found. If you're hurting, let yourself feel it. You are not failing. You are unfolding. You are returning slowly, gently, truthfully to the life your soul always knew would grow you in ways nothing else could. And one day, maybe not today, you'll look back and see it. Not just the pain, but the pattern. Not just the loss, but the lesson. Not just the wound, but the wisdom. And in that moment, you won't ask, "Why me?" You'll whisper, "Of course me." Because only you could live this story. Only you could hold this frequency. Only you could become who you were always meant to be, through this exact path, this exact breath, this exact life. You may not remember choosing the hard parts, the grief, the betrayal, the longing that never seems to leave. But your soul did, not because it desired suffering, but because it saw something deeper waiting on the other side. It saw who you would become when you walked through the fire and didn't let it consume you. It saw the light that would emerge when you chose to stay soft in a world that taught you to harden. It saw the beauty in breaking, not as an end, but as a sacred doorway. Pain was never the destination. It was the process. The soul doesn't romanticize it, it reveres it. Because pain, when embraced with presence, becomes a teacher unlike any other. It strips away the noise. It brings you back to the essentials. It shows you what matters. And what doesn't. It calls you home to your body, to your truth, to the tenderness you forgot you had. The soul chose this life because it knew you would forget. And it knew you would one day remember. Not all at once, but slowly, like light returning to a dark room. At first, just a flicker, a feeling, a sense that there is more than what you've been told. Then, a voice, a moment of clarity, a connection you can't explain, and eventually, a knowing, not in your head, in your bones. A remembering that who you are is not what the world named you, not what your past painted you, but what has always been true before the trauma, before the shame, before the masks. You were light before the world made you small. You were enough before anyone asked you to prove it. You were whole before you learned to break yourself into pieces to belong. And the life you're living now, with all its mess and mystery, is the exact canvas your soul needed to paint that truth back into form. You didn't come here to transcend this world. You came to touch it, to move through it, to feel everything, the ache, the wonder, the beauty of being both fragile and infinite at once. You came not to escape your humanity, but to sanctify it, to bring your light not above the pain, but into it, into the moments when your heart breaks, into the spaces where you feel lost, into the silence where you feel alone. Because the soul knows these are not dead ends, they are thresholds. And on the other side of every threshold is a choice, to close or to open, to numb or to feel, to shrink or to rise. And every time you choose to stay open, you deepen, you expand, you awaken, not into someone else, but into the vastness that was always inside you. Your life doesn't have to look extraordinary to be sacred. You don't need to be powerful in the world's eyes to carry power in your spirit. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to be honest with yourself, with what you feel, with what you know deep down but have been afraid to admit. That this life, the one you're in right now, is not a mistake, not a punishment, not a test, but a conversation between your soul and the universe. And every day, with every breath, you are writing it together. You are shaping it, feeling it, becoming through it, even in the confusion, even in the stillness, even when you're not sure where it's leading, especially then, because the soul doesn't need certainty. It needs honesty. It needs you to show up, not as the version of yourself the world expects, but as who you are underneath it all. The tender you, the weary you, the brave you, the one who still believes, even if quietly, that there's something beautiful waiting to be lived. That belief is not naive. It's sacred memory. The memory of why you came. You came to live a life that only you could live. Not to fix it all, not to get it perfect, but to bring your presence to it, to hold space for it, to make meaning in the midst of the mess, to let love move through you, even when your heart is breaking, and to remind others through your being, your breath, your becoming, that they are not alone, that their life matters, that their soul too chose this path, and that somewhere, beneath all the noise, they are remembering too. There will be moments when you doubt everything, your path, your purpose, your place in this world. You'll look around and wonder how everyone else seems to be thriving while you're still trying to hold yourself together. You'll question your choices, your direction, your worth. And in those moments, it will be tempting to forget what you've remembered, to slip back into the trance of trying to be what others want, to chase safety and conformity, to abandon your truth for belonging. But your soul didn't come here for safety. It came for truth, for liberation, for the kind of peace that doesn't come from pleasing, but from standing in who you are, even if your voice trembles, even if your hands shake, even if no one claps, because the soul knows real freedom doesn't come from being understood. It comes from being true. And when you are true, you don't need permission to be whole. You already are. You begin to see that every time you betrayed yourself to be accepted, it cost more than you realized. That every yes you gave from fear was a no to your own heart. That every version of you that was shaped for survival now longs to be seen for who you truly are. And this too is part of the soul's plan. Not the betrayal, but the awakening that follows. The moment you can no longer pretend. The moment you'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded by comfort built on lies. The moment you hear yourself say, I can't live like this anymore, and you mean it. That's not a breakdown. That's the soul breaking through. The real path doesn't begin when everything is clear. It begins when you choose to walk anyway, into the fog, into the unknown, into the unlearning. Because what's ahead is not just a new version of you. It's the original you. The one buried under years of trying to be enough. The one who remembers that worth was never something to be earned. It was your birthright. Your soul knew this world would ask you to forget, and it knew you'd have to say no, not once, but over and over, to everything that isn't love. Not just in others, in yourself, to the thoughts that tell you you're too late, to the shame that whispers you're not enough, to the fear that tells you to stay small. Say no to all that. That's sacred. That's sovereignty. That's what real power looks like. Not the ability to dominate, but the courage to be soft in a hard world, to stay open, to keep choosing presence over performance, love over protection, truth over comfort. That's why your soul chose this life, because it knew you could do it. Not perfectly, not without falling, but honestly, genuinely, with enough brokenness to stay humble and enough hope to keep going. You are not weak because you feel deeply. You are not failing because you're still figuring it out. You are not behind because your journey doesn't look like someone else's. You are here, fully, and that's everything. That's the point. To be here, to be awake inside your life, to stop waiting for the someday when it all makes sense, and instead choose to meet this moment with grace, not because it's easy, but because it's real, and real is what heals. So breathe into this truth. You do not have to earn your belonging. You do not have to chase your destiny. You are already inside it. Every breath you take is a continuation of that sacred yes your soul whispered before it arrived here. And even now, even in your confusion, even in your weariness, you are still saying yes. With every step, with every tear, with every time you choose not to give up. That's what choosing this life looks like. Not grand, not perfect, but present, real, alive. And that, more than anything, is what your soul came here to experience. The truth is, you're not here to be flawless. You're not here to be polished, always smiling, always sure. You're not here to be a perfectly packaged version of spiritual wisdom. You're here to feel, to learn, to fall and rise and break and heal and wonder what the point is, and then catch a glimpse of it in the most unexpected moment. The sunlight on your skin after days of rain. A stranger's kindness when you are sure no one saw you. A line in a book that cracks something open. A memory that returns not to hurt you, but to remind you what you've lived through. These are the gentle whispers of why you came, and they rarely arrive with trumpets. They rarely scream. They come in stillness, in breath, in presence. Your soul is not in a rush. It is not measuring your success by how quickly you figure it all out. It is watching who you are becoming in the waiting, in the uncertainty, in the places where there is no map and no guarantee. The soul doesn't need you to be right. It needs you to be real. It needs you to stop pretending you don't care when you do. It needs you to admit what you long for, even if you're afraid you'll never have it. It needs you to speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. Because each time you do, you come back to yourself. To the self that never needed to be fixed, only remembered. The self beneath the striving. The self beneath the shame. The self that existed long before the world taught you to be something else. This is what healing really is. Not changing who you are, but releasing everything you were never meant to carry. The expectations, the projections, the guilt, the silence, the roles. Healing is not an achievement, it's a return. A return to the place inside you that still believes in beauty, in softness, in meaning, in love. Not the kind of love that's perfect, but the kind that's present. The kind that stays. The kind that says, even now, even here, you are still worthy. And that love, that fierce, quiet, unconditional love begins with you. With the way you speak to yourself in your hardest moments. With the way you forgive yourself, not just once, but every time the old pain resurfaces. With the way you honor your growth, even when no one else sees it. Your soul didn't choose this life so you could impress anyone. It chose it so you could embody truth. Live it, feel it. Let it radiate from you in such a way that others remember their own truth just by being near you. That's the kind of presence you were born to hold. And you don't have to do anything big to hold it. You just have to be here. You just have to be willing to stay with yourself when it's hard. To not abandon your heart for the illusion of safety. To not trade your authenticity for acceptance. You have to choose you over and over until it becomes natural. Until it becomes the only thing that makes sense. And even then, you'll forget. That's okay. Forgetting is part of the journey. It makes remembering sacred. Every time you come back to yourself, the return is deeper. The connection is truer. The roots grow stronger. And that's how the soul evolves, not by avoiding the mess, but by moving through it with grace. You are not here to skip chapters. You are not here to fast forward through the pain. You are here to feel it, to meet it with presence, to let it teach you what no book ever could. You are here to live your questions fully, to walk with your contradictions, to love yourself through your shadows, and to let that love spill outward, not because you're trying to be good, but because it's what happens when you're whole. This is the life your soul chose, not because it would be easy, but because it would be real. And real is what transforms. Real is what wakes you up. Real is what opens you to the beauty that was always around you and within you, waiting for you to see it. There is a kind of clarity that only comes when you've walked through the fog, a kind of peace that can't be earned through avoidance, but only through presence. You don't arrive at this place by winning at life. You arrive by surrendering to it, by loosening your grip on who you thought you needed to be, by letting the masks fall, the armor soften, the walls come down. And then, in that fragile openness, you begin to hear it, the voice you forgot was yours, the knowing that doesn't need to shout, the gentle certainty that you are not broken. You never were. You were just hidden beneath all the survival. And that survival had its purpose. It got you here. It carried you through places you didn't know how to walk. But now, you are being asked to do something new, to no longer live from the wound, to no longer shape your life around fear, to stop trying to earn what you already are, worthy, whole, chosen. And that begins not with a single decision, but with 100 quiet ones. The choice to rest when you've been taught to push. The choice to speak when silence feels safer. The choice to feel when you'd rather numb. These are acts of courage, acts of remembering, acts of returning to your soul's original agreement. Because when your soul chose this life, it didn't sign up for ease. It signed up for awakening. And awakening is not a clean process. It's messy. It's raw. It doesn't always look spiritual. Sometimes it looks like grief. Sometimes it looks like rage. Sometimes it looks like not knowing who you are anymore and realizing that's okay. Because who you thought you were was built to survive a version of life that no longer serves you. And now, something softer, something truer, something more aligned is asking to emerge. But it cannot come through pretending. It cannot come through bypassing the real work. It can only come through embodiment, through honesty, through staying. And that's what you're doing. You are staying. Even when it hurts. Even when it's quiet. Even when nothing makes sense. And that is the most sacred thing. The courage to stay present with your life as it is, without trying to rush it into what it's not. That is the doorway into grace. The opening into a deeper kind of strength. Not the kind that resists, but the kind that allows, that trusts, that breathes. And in that breathing, you start to hear the language of your soul again. Not as a booming revelation, but as a whisper, a pull, a gentle invitation to come closer, to lean in, to trust that you are not lost, you are being led. And the path is not linear. It weaves, it loops, it pauses. It asks you to walk in circles until you realize what you needed was never in the destination, but in how you were walking, who you were becoming along the way. And in that becoming, the life you're living stops feeling like something you have to survive. It starts feeling like something you get to experience, to participate in, to witness moment by moment with awe, because you see it now, the beauty in the mundane, the sacred in the sorrow, the meaning in the madness. It was always there. You just needed to slow down enough to feel it, to hear it, to remember that your soul did not choose this life so you could rush through it. It chose this life so you could be present to it. All of it, the light and the dark, the beginning and the end, the silence and the song. And now you're beginning to hear the music again. Not the one the world plays for you, the one that's always been playing inside you. Quiet, patient, true, the song that sounds like coming home. Maybe the greatest shift in your life won't come from some big decision, but from the moment you finally stop trying to become someone else. From the moment you exhale the lie that you must constantly improve in order to be loved. From the quiet, radical choice to meet yourself here, now, as you are, without fixing, without force, just with presence. Maybe your soul chose this life not so you could achieve, but so you could remember. Remember how to be gentle with yourself, how to slow down, how to listen to the wisdom beneath the noise. You weren't sent here to be perfect. You weren't sent here to win. You were sent here to feel the aliveness of being human. And that includes everything, the raw, the painful, the in-between. If you're waiting to be healed before you live fully, you'll miss the point. Because healing isn't a destination. It's a deepening, a softening, a reintroduction to the parts of you that were buried under expectation and shame. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming. And becoming often looks like standing still. Like learning to love your life in its unfinished form. Like sitting with the ache instead of silencing it. Like speaking your truth even if your voice quivers. Like not pretending to have answers when all you have is presence. But presence is everything. It's what you came for. It's what changes everything, not by force, but by being. You are not here to perform healing. You are here to live in truth. And the truth is, you've always been enough. Before the titles, before the trauma, before the striving, you are already what you've been seeking. Your soul chose this life not to become someone new, but to peel back the layers that kept you from seeing who you've always been. That's why the path feels difficult sometimes. Because undoing what the world taught you takes courage. It takes grace. It takes time. And most of all, it takes compassion. You can't rush this. You can't skip the middle. You have to live each moment as sacred, even the messy ones. Especially the messy ones. Because that's where the gold is. That's where your depth is carved. That's where your light becomes real. Not something you project, but something you embody. And as you walk, as you fall, as you rise, you begin to trust something deeper. Not outside of you, within. The part of you that knew, that always knew. Even when you forgot. Even when you doubted. Even when you wanted to quit. That part of you never stopped believing. It carried you here. And it will keep carrying you through every ending, every beginning, every breath. Because your soul doesn't need you to be fearless. It needs you to be faithful, to keep showing up, to keep saying yes to the life you're living, not just the one you dream of. Because this life, exactly as it is the one that holds the doorway, the one that holds your voice, your softness, your truth. And one day, when you look back, you'll see it, not just the pain, but the precision. Not just the chaos, but the choreography. Not just the questions, but the quiet ways the answers were always with you. Whispering, waiting, holding the shape of everything you were becoming, long before you saw it yourself. That is why your soul chose this life. Not because it would be easy, but because it would be true. And that truth, no matter how heavy it feels some days, will set you free. You won't always see the meaning in real time. Some days will feel hollow. Some seasons will stretch longer than you thought you could bear. The path won't always feel illuminated. But even in those moments, the soul walks with you, not as an answer, but as a quiet presence. You're not expected to always understand. You're only asked to stay open. To trust that what feels lost is still leading you. That what feels broken may be breaking open a part of you that needed light. And sometimes, the light doesn't come in grand awakenings. Sometimes it arrives in silence. In a moment where you don't crumble, even though you could have. In a choice to respond with love when anger would have been easier. In the pause before you repeat an old pattern. In the breath that lets you choose something softer. That is the soul at work. Not in dramatic change, but in gentle shifts, subtle awakenings, unseen progress. Your soul doesn't rush. It knows that time is not linear. It knows that you're not late, that every detour, every delay, every closed door was redirecting you, not punishing you. You are not here to be efficient. You are here to be alive, to feel this world with all its textures, to sit in discomfort and still choose to be kind, to walk through grief and still choose to believe in joy, to lose parts of yourself and still return to love, not as an act of performance, but as an act of truth, the kind of truth that doesn't need to prove itself. It simply is, like a mountain, like the sky, like your soul, unshaken beneath the weather of your life. And when you begin to live from that place, the steady place inside you, the world doesn't have to change for you to feel peace. You stop chasing certainty. You stop needing validation. You begin to trust the unfolding, to welcome the mystery, to find meaning not in perfection, but in presence. The present moment becomes holy, not because it's easy, but because it's real. And the more real you allow yourself to be, the more you feel at home, not in a place, but in yourself. And maybe that was always the destination. Not some version of life without struggle, but a version of you that knows how to remain soft through it. A version of you that doesn't run when things get heavy. A version of you that can hold the tension between heartbreak and hope and still remain whole. That is the kind of life your soul came to live. Not one that looks good on the outside, but one that feels honest on the inside. Not one where you get everything you want, but one where you learn how to love what you have. Not one where pain never comes, but one where you finally stop abandoning yourself when it does. That's the return. That's the remembering. That's the quiet miracle of waking up, not to some grand realization, but to your own aliveness. The fact that you're still here, still breathing, still listening, still choosing to show up. And that is more than enough. You may wonder sometimes, what if I've wasted too much time? What if I've missed the path? But time, to the soul, is not measured in hours or years. It's measured in awakenings, in the depth of your presence, and how fully you meet this moment. The soul does not judge how long it took you to return. It simply rejoices that you made it back at all. There is no deadline for healing, no expiration date on becoming. You don't need to catch up. You don't need to make up for lost time. You only need to begin again, and again, and again, each time with a little more tenderness, a little more truth, a little more trust in the mystery of how life rearranges itself the moment you surrender to what is. Your path is not something you missed, it's something you're living. Even when you feel off course, you're still on it. Even when everything falls apart, something in you is still holding, still learning, still becoming. There is wisdom in your detours. There is purpose in your pauses. Nothing is wasted when you live with awareness, and you are far more aware than you think. You may not have language for it yet. You may not have clarity. But deep down, there is a knowing, a part of you that recognizes truth when it arrives. That soft ache in your chest when something resonates. That quiet pull in your gut when you're being invited toward more. These are the signals, the subtle threads that connect you to the life your soul is here to live. And when you follow them, not with logic, but with presence, your life begins to feel less like something you're managing and more like something sacred you're walking with. Even the pain becomes sacred, even the waiting, even the unraveling. Because you begin to see it's not about what happens to you. It's about how you hold it, how you stay with yourself in the middle of it, how you keep listening when everything goes silent. That's the work. That's the journey. To befriend the silence. To let it teach you things noise never could. To trust the stillness when it tells you not to rush. To trust your softness when the world says toughen up. To trust that your intuition, even when it leads you away from what looks like success, is guiding you toward something deeper. Something your soul came here for. Not just comfort, not just approval, but truth. And truth, while not always easy, is always freeing. It lifts the weight of performing. It releases the need to be someone you're not. It makes space for joy, not the fleeting kind, but the kind that arises simply because you're aligned. Simply because you're no longer betraying yourself to belong. And when you live from that place, that rooted, honest place, everything changes. Not necessarily on the outside, but inside. Your relationships deepen. Your breath slows. Your energy softens. Your life becomes a quiet reflection of your inner clarity. And people feel it, even if they don't understand it. They feel your peace, your presence, your truth. And that truth becomes a permission slip for them to do the same. This is how we heal the world. Not by preaching, not by pushing, but by living the truth of who we are so fully that it reminds others who they are. That is your power. That is your purpose. Not to change everyone, but to remember yourself so clearly that your very being becomes a lighthouse. A place others recognize as home, because you've come home to yourself. And there is no greater return than that. There is something beautiful about realizing you don't need to rush toward becoming. You're not late to your life. You haven't missed your moment. You are not behind. You are exactly where your soul knew you would be. Not because you followed a perfect path, but because even in the stumbles, even in the silence, even in the long nights of doubt, you kept going. You kept breathing. You kept choosing to feel. And feeling is sacred. In a world that tells you to numb, to move on, to distract yourself, choosing to stay present is a revolution. Choosing to sit with discomfort rather than escape, it is an act of profound courage. And every time you choose to stay with yourself, you rewrite a story. You soften an old wound. You change the course of your becoming. You are not who you were last year, not even who you were last week. Because every breath, every truth spoken, every boundary held, every tear honored, it transforms you slowly, quietly, deeply. And it's okay if no one notices. This part of the journey is not about being seen. It's about seeing yourself, meeting yourself, holding space for your own becoming without needing applause. Your healing doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real, gentle, steady, rooted in truth. Because truth, when lived, carries a frequency no performance ever could. You don't have to prove your growth. You are living it. You don't have to convince anyone that you've changed. You're embodying it. And that embodiment speaks louder than explanation. This is why your soul chose this life. For the quiet mastery, the invisible milestones, the subtle revolutions, for the remembering that happens not in one grand moment, but in hundreds of ordinary ones. A deeper breath, a softened tone, a thought you no longer believe, a pattern you no longer follow. These are the signs. This is the return, not to perfection, but to presence, to your essence, the part of you that existed before the world told you who to be. That version of you, the soul beneath the surface, has always been whole. And now you're learning how to live from that place. Not because you have it all figured out, but because you're willing to keep listening, willing to keep shedding, willing to keep choosing what feels real over what looks right. That is devotion. That is depth. That is the language of the soul. And it's okay if it doesn't always make sense to others. They're not meant to understand every step. You are not living their path. You are living yours. And your path is sacred, even when it's unclear, even when it's quiet, even when it asks you to walk alone. Some of the most powerful shifts happen in solitude. Some of the deepest wisdom rises in the spaces where no one is watching. And when you emerge from those spaces, when you begin to live from that deeper place, everything begins to feel different, not easier, but truer, grounded, aligned. You no longer seek validation in places that can't give it. You no longer chase love from people who can't hold it. You no longer abandon yourself just to be chosen, because you've already chosen yourself, not once, but again and again. And that is why you came, to live in a way that is true, to speak in a way that is kind, to love in a way that begins within. That is how the soul remembers. That is how the world heals. Somewhere along the way, you may have been told that your worth comes from doing, from producing, from becoming what others expect. But your soul knows better. It knows your worth is not transactional. It is not earned by performance or polished by perfection. It is intrinsic. It is ancient. It is untouchable. Even in your lowest moments, it remains. Even in your silence, your softness, your stillness, you are worthy. Not because of what you do, but because of what you are. And what you are is a living, breathing expression of the sacred. You don't need to become anything else to be whole. You don't need to be healed to be lovable. You are not a project. You are a presence. And your presence, when lived from truth, heals more than any performance ever could. The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more honest ones. People who are willing to tell the truth about what it means to be human. People who cry when they need to cry. Who rest when they are tired. Who speak when silence becomes a prison. Who forgive not because it's easy, but because it's freeing. Your soul didn't choose this life to pretend. It chose it to remember, and to help others remember that being alive is enough. That joy is not earned. That love is not scarce. That presence is more powerful than control. So if you're tired of trying to be everything to everyone, let this be your permission to stop, to breathe, to return to yourself. You were never meant to live your life trying to be digestible. You were meant to be whole, wild, unfiltered. You were meant to feel the full range of this human experience, not because it's easy, but because it's real. And realness is what opens the heart. It's what draws people to you. Not your polish, but your presence. Not your image, but your essence. And that essence is not something you find. It's something you return to. By peeling back the layers. By sitting in the silence. By listening not to the noise of the world, but to the whisper beneath it. The whisper that says, "This is your path, not theirs. This is your healing, not their approval. This is your truth." And it doesn't need to be explained, just lived, just honored, just held with enough reverence that it starts to expand within you. And as it expands, you begin to see others differently too, with less judgment, with more compassion. Because when you stop rejecting yourself, you stop rejecting everyone else. You begin to understand that we're all walking each other home, even if our paths look different, even if our wounds are different, even if our timelines don't align. And that understanding, that depth, that grace, it becomes your gift. The thing you offer to the world without trying. The energy you bring into every room. Not because you figured it all out, but because you finally stopped running from yourself. That is the life your soul came to live. Not a life of certainty, but a life of connection. A life where the truth is enough, where you are enough, where the beauty is not in becoming more, but in remembering that you've always been everything. And one day, when the noise quiets and the striving fades, you will look back and see how far you've come. Not in distance, but in depth. Not in accomplishments, but in honesty. Not in how much you did, but in how deeply you felt, how fully you stayed, how bravely you kept opening, even when it would have been easier to close. And that will be the real victory. Not the trophies, not the titles, but the tenderness, the gentleness, the softness you reclaimed after the world tried to harden you. The kindness you offered yourself in the moments no one saw. The moments you could have broken, but chose instead to breathe, to stay, to live. That is soul work. That is why you came. To live a life that is not defined by the eyes of the world, but by the truth in your heart. A life where you are not performing your healing, but embodying it. Where you are not chasing love, but becoming it. Where you are not asking for permission to rest, to feel, to speak, because your soul already gave it. And in this way, your life becomes a prayer, not a request, a remembrance, not a reaching, a returning to the sacredness of each breath, to the wisdom of your body, to the clarity that only comes when you stop asking the world who you should be and start listening to who you already are. The world will always offer noise, distraction, definitions, but your soul offers stillness. And the stillness is where everything begins to make sense again. You don't need to fix your life. You need to feel it. You don't need to prove anything. You need to pause. You need to remember that the most radical thing you can do in a world built on productivity is to rest in your being, to root into the truth that you are already whole, that this moment, with all its imperfection, is enough. You are not here to ascend out of your humanity. You are here to sink into it with love, with presence, with grace. To know that your feelings are not flaws, they are messengers. That your doubts are not weaknesses, they are invitations to trust. That your story, exactly as it's unfolding, is the story your soul came here to live. Not to escape it, not to rewrite it, but to meet it fully, to sit with it like a friend, to listen for what it's asking you to remember. And maybe that remembering will not come all at once. Maybe it will arrive in pieces, in glances, in waves. But when it comes, when the remembering settles deep into your bones, you will feel it. A peace that doesn't require answers. A love that doesn't need conditions. A clarity that lives not in your mind, but in your breath. And in that breath, you will know, this is why I came. Not to rise above life, but to live it. Fully, freely, faithfully, as only I can. And now, as you sit with all of this, the questions, the longings, the ache, the softness returning, you begin to realize something quietly profound. Your life was never random. It was never meaningless. Even the pain had purpose. Even the silence had sound. Even the detours held direction. Your soul knew. It knew that this life, with all its fractures and all its beauty, would be the exact place to remember. To remember what it means to love yourself without performance. To stay when you want to run. To rest when you've been taught to push. To speak when you've been trained to be silent. To rise, not for applause, but for truth. This was the calling. Not a profession, not a role, not a task, but a way of being. A vibration. A presence that could only be embodied through the intimacy of living. Your soul did not choose this life because it was easy. It chose it because it was real. Because it held the necessary storms to teach you stillness. The necessary grief to teach you presence. The necessary longing to teach you to come home. And now you are home. Not in a place, but in yourself. Not because everything is resolved, but because you've stopped resisting who you are. And in that surrender, you've found peace. Not the kind that avoids reality, but the kind that walks hand in hand with it. The kind of peace that says, I trust this moment. I trust this breath. I trust this unfolding. Even when it's messy. Even when it's slow. Even when it hurts. Because this is the life my soul chose. And I am no longer afraid of living it. I am here. Not waiting for some distant healing, but honoring the one that's already happening right now as I breathe. This is enough. I am enough. And this is why I came. So here you are, not perfect, not finished, but present. And maybe that's what your soul came for all along. Not the destination, but the deep, sacred act of being, fully, freely, faithfully, exactly as you are. This is why you came.